me get up here and say it quick, or I'm going to have to say good afternoon, good morning. That was a great introduction, but it's after you stay here long enough, and you learn that there's good, there's bad, and that life is life in a church. That same man that buried me in water almost 30 years ago, a little over a year ago, I buried him. And we will reunite in the kingdom. And that for me is a good reason to try to get there. Along with all the other lost, the parents, child, all of that, and all the other friends that we've lost along the way. But how do you get there? You got to be obedient. You got to do what the word says, and we're finding that hard in this new age, I guess you would call it, where everything is everything and doesn't mean anything. Now, by now, if you've gotten into any kind of a rhythm with keeping these holy days, we've gotten to a point where you start to read over the story of the Exodus, and you see if you do it. Now, it may be a little complicated the way I do it, because I tried to put it together. I put the Exodus story together somehow and try to move it forward, and also get the martyrdom of Yeshua in there. Now, in order to really understand the flaws and problems of humanity, what we wind up having to do is put those stories together. It's a good practice to get into, because it allows us to read the story of how God's chosen people were enslaved by the Egyptians. It shows us in some detail how the Israelites were beaten, how they were whipped and forced to work and build up ancient Egypt for Pharaoh. And if you've done any studying of history, they still say that that was amazing, and a lot of the things that were built, they still don't believe men did it. Pretty good for slave labor, huh? In itself, as I said, it was an incredible accomplishment when you look back over history and consider some of the things that were done during that period. The pyramids, for instance, they still say that you can't slide a piece of paper between those rocks. So they don't understand how they stacked them on top of each other with no great derricks and cranes and such to do that. So they don't understand that. The Sphinx, they just can't believe this, the palaces that were built. And they're finding out now in some studies that these people had, for those who were wondering why it was so hard for them to leave ancient Egypt, we're going back and doing some historical study now and finding out that these people had, in those primitive rock homes, hot and cold water running. We didn't believe that for a long time, but now it's starting to come out on History Channel and some of the other places where you can study these things. They've had hot and cold running water, forced air conditioning. So it makes a little bit more sense then when you hear the Hebrews complaining about going out into the desert. Although that's part of the reason that we're pulled away. You're pulled away from comfort to get to greater comfort, to get to greater understanding. But the focus of the story is in the eternal sending Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh to tell him to free God's people in order that they might go serve him, which is the bottom line. Now, of course, being a man of some ego, Pharaoh refused. And details of the story will drop anchor in Exodus 7, where it tells of Pharaoh being confronted by Moses, and Moses threw his staff down and it turned into a snake. Pharaoh's magicians produced snakes to compete with Pharaoh's rod, and Pharaoh's rod ate them. I think that would have been the end of it for me. Okay, I can't deal with that. I can't do anything like that, so maybe I should worship this God of yours. Nope. Ego doesn't work like that. Ego says, hey, he ate them, but we'll just stuff his face, make some more. Pharaoh ignored Moses and the magicians, snakes, when they were eaten. Then Moses dipped his rod in the Nile, and it turned to blood, killing off all the fish in it. Yet, because Pharaoh's magicians were able to do the same thing, Pharaoh ignored Moses. I talked about this a few weeks ago and wondered why didn't he, while they were making such a big deal of he turned the river to blood, why didn't he have his magicians turn it back? Wouldn't that make more sense? This is a man that obviously didn't care about his people. Obviously didn't care about his people. But again, Pharaoh ignored Moses, though the plague lasted 7 days. After that, he sent swarms of frogs, sent gnats, and sent flies. Now in Exodus 8, if you go forward, after killing off all the Egyptian livestock and putting boils on the Egyptian people in Exodus 9, you would think that this would wake Pharaoh up. But I guess there were no boils on him, so no. No, not yet. But did nothing for him. Continuing the story, God sent locusts and darkness to eat all the vegetables and kill off all the meat. Even this didn't sway Pharaoh. I'll eat herbs. Now let's look at something, though, and be honest. When the Nile was turned to blood, the Egyptians had no water. That's why I say it would have been logical to turn it back to fresh water. But the Israelites, didn't do it. It doesn't work that way. No. You're not going to best me in this. Not going to happen. So when the frogs, the gnats, and the locusts came, the Egyptians were inundated with them. The Israelites, however, were not. And don't think that was lost on them. If you're swatting huge gnats and you look across and see the people that were supposed to be your slaves in relative comfort, although not in comfortable conditions, they certainly were comfortable because they weren't swatting flies. They weren't kicking frogs out. They weren't. And how did they get water? We often don't think about that when you go read it. Sometimes, as I said, you got to read between the lines. And it's easier to read between the lines when you've been there. And I think that's why God's going to allow it to happen again, so that we can all be able to read between the lines. But see, the Israelites had comfort to a degree. You see, when the hail came down and killed all the Egyptian cattle, the cattle of the Israelites was protected. Surely some of the people had to have taken notice of some of this. These plagues only fell upon Egyptians. Yet only when God himself did this did they start to look at it. But at the end, God finally decided, and if you look at all the movies, they all talk about a death angel. But please let's notice that whenever Yahweh wants killing done on such a grand scale as this, he doesn't put that on somebody else's heart. He says, I'll do it myself. The eternal, after all, it's not going to be on his heart, because not only does he have the power to destroy, but he also has the power to resurrect. Let's begin. Exodus, the 12th chapter, the 23rd verse. And we'll begin to get some understanding here. Exodus, the 12th chapter, the 23rd verse, where it says, For the Eternal will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Eternal, not a death angel, the Eternal will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer. It's the Hebrew shakaf, a verb meaning to spoil, to ruin, to destroy, to pervert, to corrupt, to wipe out. And will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your house to smite you. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to the first verse. Exodus, the 12th chapter, the first verse. Got to go through this a little bit and make it sink in. Make it sink in. And we can move forward. Exodus, the 12th chapter, the first verse, where it says, "And the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be to you the beginning of months." Everybody was jumping on December 31st. Christians out there talking about New Year's, Happy New Year. I did it about a week ago, and some people are like, what's he talking about? That's what he's talking about. And the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th of this month they shall take to them each a lamb for his father's house, a lamb for a house. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let he and his neighbor next to his house take according to the number of the souls, each one according to the eating of his mouth. You shall count concerning the lamb." In other words, don't take any more than you need. And they say that conservation is a bad thing. How is it a bad thing when God is telling them don't use any more than you need? Verse 5. "Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening, and they shall take some of the blood and strike on the two side posts and upon the upper doorposts of the houses in which they shall eat it, and they shall eat the flesh in that night roasted with fire and unleavened bread. And they shall eat it with bitter herbs. Do not eat of it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted with fire. Its head with its legs and with its inward parts, and you shall not let any of it remain until the morning, and that which remains of it until the morning you shall burn with fire. And you shall eat of it this way, with your loins girded and your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat in a hurry. It is the Eternal's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And I will execute judgments against all the gods, plural, of Egypt. I am the Eternal. And the blood shall be a sign to you upon the houses where you are, and where I see the blood, I will pass over you." Didn't we just hear that? "And the plague shall not be upon you for destruction when I smite in the land of Egypt, and this day shall be a memorial to you, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Eternal throughout your generation." There's always been a mix-up on that because they believe, some people are starting to say now, that you do the Lord's Passover along with this and eat a meal, and it's said, I think we got that cleared up Monday night, that's Sunday night, that's not how that's done. Matter of fact, it can become a problem for you. But it says you shall keep a feast to the Eternal through your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by a law forever. In other words, you keep this separate thing separate. You do the Lord's Supper one night, and you do this as another night to remember, to memorialize this coming out of Egypt. You don't put the two together, but so many do that. But we've gotten to the point where we feel like, well, gee, he didn't say anything, so I guess it's okay to do that. We'll find out soon enough if it's not. Verse 15. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And on the first day shall be a holy gathering. And in the seventh day there shall be a holy gathering. That's why we do it today, and well, we will do it again Monday. Does that mean that we don't come back Saturday? No. That's your regular Sabbath. Also a holy convocation. In the seventh day you shall be a holy gathering for you. No manner of work shall be done in them, except that which every man must eat. That only may be done by you. Interesting there. And then you got some people who say, oh no, you can't do anything. No, it says just do enough to get what you got done. Let's not go too far. 17. And you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, for in this same day I have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. That's why I like to read instead of just talking through it. Because every line that you read, every time you read, you throw your eyes in there, he throws something back out there to clarify something that maybe other people stopped reading a while ago, suddenly have lost that information. Or maybe not so much always lost it, but maybe just decided, let's do it my way. Or what Christ calls the highway. Be careful, Ray. Verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses, for whoever eats that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Among the aliens and among the natives of the land, you shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places, you shall eat unleavened bread. And as we all know, the Eternal came, and all who were behind the lintels were spared. It doesn't say anything about what happened after, because he said, if I say it, it'll do it. So you can be sure that if anybody got caught outside, oh well. It's not like you didn't know. I wonder if I can leave a foot outside. Oops. I'm sure you see, I say these things and people think, you're just being negative. No, I know people. How close to the line can I get before the axe comes down? How close can I stick my finger outside? Will it? Yeah, it's like that. We're like that. We're like that, and we've been like that for a long time. But at this point, Pharaoh decided to free the Israelites and allow them to go and serve the Eternal. Now they were free, and they were allowed to serve God in his presence. They were happy, they were obedient, and they were good people, and God had no more trouble with them, right? Right? For a title, we'll call this one, Bring Us Barabbas. Bring Us Barabbas. Now let's be honest. We know that even after being freed from hard bondage by the Eternal and being set free with much spoil from the Egyptians, let's get some understanding about this word spoiling of the Egyptians. This was no gift, as some have said. This was no gift. The Israelites built Egypt for 400 years. They were made to work every day, free, for 400 years. There was no spoiling. This was simply back pay, not a gift. In a more modern vernacular, you could say this was, can't say it too loud, reparations. And let's also be aware that in seeing that the Israelites were somehow protected from the plagues laid upon them, many Egyptians, seeing this, thought, what's this guy care about us? I'm out of here. Many Egyptians came out with the Israelites to get away from Pharaoh. Yet, there's an old psychological saying that persists in such events. You've heard it said when people are on their second or maybe third marriage and they go to a psychologist and try to figure out why things are going so badly for them, and the psychologist, being blunt as they are, if you've ever been to one, will tell you, wherever you go, there you are. In essence, whatever part of the problem is caused by you, you take it with you, wherever you go. And the problem begins anew in your new situation if we don't correct it between our two ears. It's just that way. It just is that way. When we fix us, I could say only when you fix you. But the only problem is I've got 3 fingers here pointing back at me saying, hey buddy, you don't get away with this. You don't get away with this. Only when you fix you does your problem go away. That was the situation with the Israelites. As soon as they got out from under Pharaoh's whip and were free, these stiff-necked folk started complaining about everything. Not enough water. You've got Gerazine, I wanted Perrier. Not enough meat. I know you said lamb, but they've got these great steaks over there, and then you came up with what they call it, the manna. That stuff tastes awful. I don't like it. It's not very good. Not enough meat. Too much meat. Hey, now it's too much of it. I can't eat all of that. Too much meat. Wrong kind of meat. They whined about everything. And God supplied their every need at every turn, and it was never good enough for them. Yet, as soon as an alternative leader rose up and began inciting an insurrection against Moses, the Israelites jumped right up and jumped right behind Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and tried to dump Moses and Aaron. Let's go to Numbers, the 16th chapter, the first verse. Numbers, the 16th chapter, first verse, where it says, now, Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, what? Whoa. He already had power. If he was a son of Levi, he was a Levite. If he was a Levite, was he not one of the chosen? Don't get me started. That's why we go through this. For those, why don't you just sum it up and explain it? No. See it for yourselves. You'll see the problem far more clearly. Son of Levi took both Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and on the sons of Peleth, sons of Reuben. Even they rose up before Moses with some of the sons of Israel, 250 rulers of the assembly, elect men in the congregation. They already had position. Oh, they wanted to be the top dog. You even hear it now. Hey, what does it mean when you're number 2? It means you weren't number 1. Whoever remembers who lost the Super Bowl? Hey, ask them about those injuries the next day. They'll tell you that they did the best they could. These folks weren't doing the best they could. They just wanted to just jump in there and somebody just anoint them in the spot of Moses and Aaron. Verse 2. Even they rose up before Moses with with the sons of Israel, 250 rulers of the assembly, elect men in the congregation, men who were well known. What more do you want? And they gathered themselves against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon you. What? Since all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the eternal is among them, why then do you lift yourselves up among the congregation of the eternal? Excuse me, guys, but I didn't want this. Someone wanted it for me. Be careful, you're getting real close to the line here, fella. Verse 4, and Moses heard and fell on his face. He didn't go off. You know how we are. No, he just went straight to his knees, went straight to his face. And he spoke to Korah and to all the company, saying, even tomorrow the Eternal will show who are his. And him who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. Even him whom he has chosen. I like the subtlety of Moses. Moses, there's something about humility that makes you do things in a subtle manner instead of walking around like you were born to it. I like that. There's something about that attitude that it's just healthy. And you don't see it very often in this world because they tell you, oh, if you don't toot your horn, who is? I have an answer to that, but I'm being recorded, so I have to be cool. The Eternal will show you who are his, and him who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. Even him who he has chosen, he will cause to come near to him. Do this. Take fire pans, Korah, and all his company, and put fire in them, and put incense in them before the Eternal tomorrow. And it shall be the man whom the Eternal chooses, he shall be holy. You take too much upon you, sons of Levi. Even put that in there. You already have position. You want more. Sons of Levi. And Moses said to Korah, here, now you sons of Levi. Now that's about the only sticking in of the knife he did right there. And that was enough. And it was proper. It was proper. Here now, you sons of Levi, is it only a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Eternal, and to stand before the congregation to minister to it. And you're the only ones that get paid. And he has brought you near, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. And do you seek the priesthood also? For this cause you and all your company are gathered against the Eternal. And what is Aaron that you murmur against him? And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and they said, we will not come up. Oh, now we're just going to be rebellious. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land that flows with milk and honey and air conditioning to kill us in the wilderness? But must you also seize domination over us? Besides, you have not brought us into a land that flows with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance in fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. What arrogance. And a dare. If we don't come, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Moses? We're asking the wrong guy. Asking the wrong guy. Put our eyes out. Asking the wrong guy. You're going to have to be put out in a minute. Better shut up. Verse 15. And Moses was very angry and said to the Eternal, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one mule from them, neither have I hurt one of them. And Moses said to Korah, stand before the Eternal, you and all your company, you and they, and Aaron tomorrow. And every man take his fire pan and put incense in them, and let every man bring his fire pan before the Eternal. 255 fire pans, you also, and Aaron with his one fire pan. And every man take his fire pan and put fire in them and lay incense on it. And stand in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them into the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Eternal appeared to all the congregation. At that point, I would have been on my knees groveling. They stood there. Oh yeah, we about to get it all now. No kidding. No kidding. Verse 20. And the Eternal spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, so that I may devour them in a moment. And they fell on their faces and said, oh God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin? And will you be angry with all the congregation? And the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get away from the tent of Korah and Dathan and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, I pray you, get away from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be destroyed in all their sins. You can't come with a better warning than that. So they got away from the tent of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of their tents, and their wives and their sons and their infants. What did they think was going to happen? They were going to be handed everything? And Moses said, by this you shall know that the Eternal has sent me and does all these works, and that not from my own heart. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they are visited according to the examination of all men, and that's a natural death, the Eternal has not sent me. But if the Eternal makes a new thing, that's the thing about God. He is in such control, he can tell you with precision exactly what's going to happen. And if he sends it through someone else, they look brilliant. But he knew all the time, so he's not going to have to, oh yeah, I did that. He knew it was going to happen. But if the Eternal makes a new thing, and the earth opens her mouth and swallows them up with all that they have, and they go down alive into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Eternal. Didn't have to wait long either. And it happened as he had made an end of speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and the households and all the men who were there for Korah and all their goods. They and all that they had went down alive into Sheol. And the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel around them fled at their cry, because that's who they really wanted. That's who they really wanted. For they said, lest the earth swallow us up. Because he figured that he had to possibly be knowing what they were thinking. Are we next? And there came out a fire from the Eternal and burned up the 255 men who offered incense. If I was thinking this is the right guy, I would have been one scared dude right about then. And with good reason. It just seemed that no matter what God did for the Israelites, it was never enough. They had to have their way, and eventually, of the original ones who came out, the ones who came out of Egypt, only 2 were allowed to go into the promised land. Caleb and Joshua. Numbers, the 32nd chapter, the 11th verse. Oh, that's going to be good. Numbers, the 32nd chapter, the 11th verse, where it says, surely none of the men that came up out of Egypt from 20 years old up and up shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not fully followed me. Notice that. I love how precise his wording is. Because they have not fully followed me. Does that mean that they didn't do everything he said? Or did they think that they were grumbling to themselves? But somehow they weren't completely on board. Therefore, his attitude is, if you don't want to be there, you don't have to. Get out. Matter of fact, if you're not even brave enough to say it, I'll do it for you. We're just going to cut them off. These 2 guys go because their hearts were with me. The rest of you, the only reason you all didn't go down that hole with the rest of them is because I was giving you a chance. And you still grumble to yourselves. These 2 have followed me fully. 2, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun. For they have fully followed the Eternal. And throughout the history of these people, they have always been selfish, warlike, grumbling, and stiff-necked. And wherever they've gone, there they were. And God knew it. But he loved them anyway. And that's the part that we have trouble with. He still loved them. He was giving them every possible chance. And they're going to get one more in the end. Matter of fact, they're jealous of us now because of the chance we're getting. And we're walking around like, oh yeah, we replaced them. Get away from that concept of a replacement theology. Nothing has been replaced. He just gave them a little time to do what they do. But at some point, he's going to come back and show them what he does, and they're going to have 2 choices, just as these did here. Either you're going to see the fire and run and say, forgive me, and have it in your head as well as your hands and your heart, or you're going to fake it and burn like everybody else. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. He warned every prophet he sent to them of their attitude before he sent them, so that they would be warned. Ezekiel, the 2nd chapter, the 1st verse. Ezekiel, the 2nd chapter, the 1st verse, where it says, and he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak to you. And the Spirit entered into me when he spoke to me and set me on my feet, so that I heard him who spoke to me. And he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to the nations, the rebelling ones who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have sinned against me to this day. And the sons are stiff of face and hard of heart. I am sending you to them. And you shall say to them, so says the Eternal. And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house. Yea, they shall know that there has been a prophet among them, and you, son of man, do not be afraid of them and of their words, though briars and thorns are with you, and you dwell among scorpions. Whoa. Do not be afraid of their words, nor frightened by their faces, though they are a rebellious house. And you shall speak my words to them, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are rebellious. In other words, tell them what you want to say. If they don't want to hear it, that's on them. If, however, you don't say it, it's on you. And this attitude carried over onto the days of Yeshua, when he came unto them. They'd found their way into another problem. Rome. In 30 AD, Jerusalem was under Roman occupation. And there's always the Pharisees who, and it's always an inside job. We don't like to think of it that way, but it's always an inside job. You can never be sold out. Judas was an insider. Let's be honest. Korah and Dathan were Levites. Can't get any more inside than that. The special chosen of God to take care of the temple. And they want to be the priests also. Wanted power, what they wanted, let's be honest. But the Pharisees eased their way into the same positions that Korah and Dathan and Abiram found themselves in. They sat, as they say they sat in Moses' seat. They were the keepers of the oracles of God. But great thing about Yeshua, he knew exactly where they were. He knew exactly what they were all about, and he'd seen it so many times before. Matthew, the 23rd chapter, the first verse. Matthew, the 23rd chapter, the first verse, where it says, Then Yeshua spoke to the crowd and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. Pause for a pregnant piece of prose, if ever there was one. Do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. But as is usually the case, there are always people who have ears to hear and understand when a prophet or a holy one is among them. Let's go to Mark, the 11th chapter, again, the first verse. Mark, the 11th chapter, the first verse, it says, When they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and to Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, he sent out two of his disciples, and he said to them, Go into the village over across from you, and as soon as you have entered into it, you will find a colt tied on which no one of men has ever sat. If you've never been on a farm, you got to know that is not the horse you want to grab. That is not the mule you want to ride. That is not the one you want to hold. But watch what happened here. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, Why do you do this? Say that the Eternal has need of him, and immediately he will send him here. And they went, and they found the colt tied by the door outside in a place where two ways meet, and they untied him and survived. That should have let them know right there God's hands were on that colt. Anybody that's ever tried to ride an unbroken colt before knows what I'm talking about. And certain of those who stood there, said to them, What are you doing, untying this colt? And they said to them, even as Yeshua had commanded, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Yeshua, and they threw their garments on it, and he sat on it, and many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches off the trees and scattered them in the way. And those going before and those following cried out, saying, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Eternal. Blessed is the King of our father David, who comes in the name of the Eternal. Hosanna in the highest. Hebrew, O save. Hosanna is the highest, and the highest is translated, O save, or O save from on high. Same thing was happening here. Along came Moses, and a few people got on board, and then when somebody else came along, oh, well, maybe this guy's not going fast enough. Let's go with him. But when he first rode in, everybody basically was giving adulation. As he rode through the streets, they were throwing up confetti or what they had or anything that they had. Yes, he's our Messiah. This is the one. He's the one that's going to save us from Rome. But as I said, the common people knew from what they had seen. They had seen the blind given their sight. They had seen the sick healed. They had seen the lame made to walk. They had heard the teachings of Yeshua in the synagogues, and they had made their choice. They were now choosing the Lamb of God, not realizing it was for an eternal sacrifice. But the Pharisees were not going to give up their power even to the Son of God without a fight. They had heard of the miracles and tried to gainsay them all. And finally, when they found a traitor among Christ's disciples, they felt that here's our chance to finally be rid of this man. Not realizing, just as their leader Satan didn't realize, that he was playing right into the hands of Almighty God. Judas sold Christ out right at the Mount of Olives, where it all started. That's deep. Luke, the 22nd chapter, the 47th verse. Luke, the 22nd chapter, the 47th verse. And as he, Yeshua, was speaking, behold, a crowd, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them, and he drew near Yeshua to kiss him. But Yeshua said to those around him, seeing what was about to occur, they said to him, Eternal, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Yeshua answered and said, let it go until now. And touching his ear, he healed him. That had to be one interesting moment for that guard. They came there to grab this man, beat him down, and drag him back off in arrest. And they went to go after him, and all of a sudden, they go after him, chop his ear off, and the man we're here to pick up, he picks up and heals my ear. He had to be in the double bind of double binds when he continued to drag him away. Had to be. Verse 52. And Yeshua said to the chief priests and commanders of the temple and elders who had come to him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and staves? When I was with you in the temple daily, you didn't stretch out your hand to me, but this is your hour and the authority of darkness. Now, if the disciples of Christ begun to fight the Roman soldiers right there at the Mount of Olives, the Pharisees would have been in a real double bind. Hey, wait a minute, this guy's fighting. How can we turn him in? This is our Savior. He can do this. Probably would have turned coat right there themselves and helped them fight and tried to get the Israelites to help them. You see, they did, after all, like their position, but they did want to be free. They were chafing under Roman rule, just as the ancestors chafed under Egyptian rule. Yes, they had their deal with Roman authorities, but they were still under that authority. Any power they had with the Hebrews was as a straw boss. You take orders from the people that you take orders from and just kind of give those orders to them and trying to get what you can out of that. That's not a good position to be in. And just as the Israelites of Moses' day prayed for a deliverer from Pharaoh, the Pharisees and Israelites of Yeshua's day prayed for a deliverer from the Romans. But in seeking a deliverer, they hadn't factored in the idea that God may again be doing a new thing. A new thing that would save them spiritually for all time. They were thinking that this was the time to fight the Romans because they were hoping that the Messiah that they were seeing before them would be the one that they read of in the Talmud. That savage Messiah, spoken of in other Jewish traditions of the time. Actually, they aren't other traditions. They are the Talmudic and Kabbalic misinterpretations and whole cloth renderings of the rabbis based on the Torah, which was given by the true Messiah. But their other traditions taught them that this savage Messiah would be the one who would fulfill the prophecies and free the Israelites physically. Yet, what did Christ tell them? Do what they say, but not what they do. Why? Because the books that they base these things on are not of God. They're of man. So it is not wise to believe in them. But of course, as the Pharisees were in the religious seat of power, it was easy for them to say, if you don't go along with us, we just throw you to the Romans. So most people were in a double bind just as they were. Oh, we've got to follow them but they're wrong. But maybe they can help us out here. But of course, as the Pharisees were in the religious seat of power, they were beyond thinking of a spiritual salvation that transcended this world. They didn't want that. They didn't want to wait for that. They were in a bind now. They wanted blood. Roman blood. And since in their minds this man wasn't going to conquer the Romans for them, plus he threatened their earthly position of authority as straw boss for the Romans, he had to go. They captured him, turned him over to Pilate, who really wanted no part of the killing because he'd seen who he was. He talked to him. He knew that there was nothing going on there. He'd already told him, I'm not the king now. My kingdom has not come. So he wanted nothing to do with that, but he had to quell what he saw was the beginnings of an insurrection among the Hebrews. And that would surely cost him his position. So Pilate had a plan. Let's go to John, the 18th chapter, 33rd verse. John, the 18th chapter, the 33rd verse. Then Pilate entered into the praetorium, or that's a private courtroom for the Roman governor, again and called Yeshua and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Yeshua answered him, "Do you say this thing of yourself, or did others say it to you about me?" And Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Yeshua answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight so that I might not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate then said to him, "Are you a king then?" Yeshua answered, "You say that I am a king. To this end I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" That's telling. It's very telling of how bad things were politically in America. In Rome. Freudian, I'm sorry. Just shows you how bad things were in Rome back then, that he didn't even know what the truth was himself, and he was a leader. So Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him. But you have a custom that I should release one of you at the Passover. Then do you desire that I release to you the king of the Jews?" Then they all cried again, "No, not this man, but Barabbas." But Barabbas was a robber. Oh, Barabbas was a little bit more than a robber. Barabbas was thought to be a leader of insurrection and had already killed Roman soldiers. Among some Pharisees and zealots, Barabbas was something of a folk hero, a Robin Hood of sorts, a legend among the Israelites who hated the Romans. His real name was Yeshua Barabbas. And many Israelites and not a few Pharisees felt that if Barabbas was free, there was still a chance of successful insurrection against the Romans. So when Pilate went public with a choice, the intrigue began. Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 18th verse. Almost done. Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 18th verse, where it says, "And they all cried out at once, saying, 'Away with this one!'" Dang, I didn't know John McCain was there. Oh, never mind. "And they all cried out at one time, 'Away with this one, and release to us Barabbas, who was thrown into prison because of a certain sedition made in the city and for murder.'" They already knew that they had the right guy. They just were looking for a reason to do something different. And they were completely torn on how to do it, because they knew if they caught him, they're not going to be free now. We want it now. You know how we get. We want it now. And Pilate, willing to release Yeshua, spoke again to them. But they cried again, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And he said to them the third time, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found no cause of death in him, therefore I will chastise him and let him go." But they pressed on him with loud voices, requesting that he might be crucified, and their voices and those of the chief priests prevailed. Now let's hold our finger here for a moment, because I want you all to notice this. Pilate knew that Yeshua had done nothing worthy of death, and also knew that the Pharisees, Sadducees, and other power brokers, if you will, wanted him dead. Pilate probably knew who Barabbas was to the Jewish people, but there was a reason, and Matthew knew exactly what it was. Now leave your finger here, but let's go to Matthew, the 27th chapter, the 18th verse. This was interesting when I read this and really understood it fully. It blew my mind. Matthew, the 27th chapter, the 18th verse, where it says, "For he knew they had delivered him because of envy." Whoa. "But as he was sitting down on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, 'Have nothing to do with that just man, for today, because of him, I have suffered many things in a dream.' But the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Yeshua. The governor answered and said to them, 'Which of the two do you desire that I release to you?' They said, 'Barabbas.' Pilate said to them, 'What then shall I do with Yeshua, who is called Christ?' And they all said to him, 'Let him be crucified.' But they cried out the more, saying, 'Let him be crucified.' But when Pilate saw that it gained nothing, but rather than a tumult was made, he took water, washed his hands before the crowd, and said, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. Then all the people answered and said, and understand the confusion that they were going through. Here's two guys. One said, one's name is Us Barabbas. The other one is Yeshua of Nazareth. And they didn't know who was who. They just know they wanted to be free. And they were, yeah, kill him, kill him, kill him, crucify him. And in the midst, out came a group of people, Pharisees and Sadducees for the most part, and said, let his blood be on us and on our children. Hitler snickered somewhere about that time. Verse 26. Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had scourged Yeshua, he delivered him to be crucified. Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 24th verse. And Pilate gave judgment that their request should be granted. And he released to them the one who had been thrown into prison for sedition and murder, for whom they had asked. And he delivered up Yeshua to their will. The Pharisees were behind this rabble at Pilate's hearing. In their eyes, this Yeshua was just not going to free them right then and there, so it was no big deal if the man who shut down their money-changing operation at the temple was crucified. It was no big deal if the man who lowered their status in the eyes of local Israelites was crucified. There could be, as a matter of fact, there could be a positive to this. They reasoned perhaps if released, this Barabbas would incite enough violence to cause problems for the Romans and perhaps even free them after all. But they all were fulfilling the plan of God without even realizing it. And as the Roman soldiers led Christ down the road to Golgotha, they had no idea what was about to happen. We all have read of these events, and truly this is why we're here today. Because of this crucifixion and resurrection. But it is under trial that we find out who we are. Just as the Romans found out who they were. Just as the Israelites found out who they were. Just as even Yeshua found out who he was. Just as with the Israelites in Egypt, as well as the Israelites in Roman-occupied Jerusalem, wherever we go, there we are. Bringing our baggage and fear and joy and pain with us. That is why God allows us to endure hardship, in order that he try us to see what kind of people we are. And if we're observant, we find out for ourselves what kind of people we are and begin to make changes as required to gain salvation. There's one exchange from the cross that is so sorely misunderstood by most of the world, and it has a significance that few people completely understand, but we have to understand it today. Because if we're going to grow and improve as people of God, it is the essence of Christ, and it is a mirror image of the character of God. Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 39th verse. Here where they are, they have thrown everybody, nailed their hands above their heads, their feet down, and they've driven those stakes up and dropped them in, and the pain that came from that. If you want to get a look at that, I think there's a movie called The Passion of the Christ. Some people don't like it, but if you want to get some little idea of what this was like, grab that movie and take a look at it. Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 39th verse, and one of the hanged criminals blasphemed him, saying, "If you are Christ, save yourself and us." Not necessarily in that order. But answering, the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, since you're in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly so, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing amiss. And what everybody doesn't understand is those were the other two guys that were helping Barabbas. They had everybody. They left, they hung these two, and they could have had Barabbas too and ended an insurrection. But in order to be politically correct, they let him go. Verse 42. And he said to Yeshua, Eternal, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Verse 43. And Yeshua said to him, the worst punctuated sentence in the history of mankind. Let's get it right. Yeshua said to him, truly I say to you today, you shall be with me in paradise. What they usually have, what most of you probably have is this. Truly I say to you, comma, today you shall be with me in paradise. And that's why they think that you go straight from death to heaven or hell or wherever. No. This is how it should have been punctuated. Yeshua said to him, truly I say to you today, comma, you shall be with me in paradise. It's so commonly believed that these men were the accomplices of Barabbas and the murder and the robbery of Roman soldiers. It would have been perfectly fitting that the three of them be hanged together, as all had been arrested. This would have been the situation had not the Pharisees been so successful in inciting the rabble to demand to Pilate that Yeshua be crucified and Barabbas be set free. But we have to believe, as did this repentant robber, that this man on this tree next to him had power to rise from the dead. That this man had no way to know how, but somehow he believed. Isn't that what they call faith? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Who gets to you? That was pure, imperfect faith. He believed that the man hanging next to him somehow had the power to save him, and he asked him for that salvation. As these days of unleavened bread began, we have to believe that the power of his blood can cleanse our sins and live as if we believe it, which means that we believe it all 7 days, all 24 hours, all 364 and 1/4 days, not just 1 day a week. We have to use this unleavened bread, which is merely a symbol, but we have to remove the real sin from our lives throughout the balance of the year. We have to remove the doubt that would have us seek a Korah or a Barabbas to intervene and allow us to continue to live in hypocrisy when we know that the only true repentance and the only true work toward righteous living will make us live in such a way that in the end we will be saved. And I mean truly saved. I mean not just, oh, I believe I'm saved. No. I mean where in the end, when the whole world is blowing up, you're pulled up to the sea of glass. We have to get to that point where we live this way all our lives, not 1 day a week. Otherwise, you're never going to make it. You're never going to get done. It's never going to happen for you. Let us grow even more to appreciate what Christ has done for us, and let us strive to live lives worthy of that sacrifice. May God bless you all.